Let's talk about revival in general.
Okay.
All of this study that you've done, and there's a lot of hours and hours and hours, and continues to be hours and hours of research and study and interviews. What stands out to you? Like, I know we've talked about, when we talked about Catherine, you said second chance. And there's something about each one of these, especially in the revivalists, that stand out to you. What is it that you believe, when you look at all of this, what comes to your mind or your spirit about all this that you've discovered?
Anybody can do it again. Anybody watching, and everybody great has done something stupid.
Genesis 26:18 tells us Isaac dug again the wells of Abraham.
In every generation, there have been revivals, massive moves of the Spirit that changed the course of history. In every revival, there were believers like you who chose to answer the call, to become the one in their generation. Discover your call to be the one in your generation.
We're about to take you face to face with history. We've been going through history of revivalists, healing evangelists, and great revival preachers from the world with Roberts Lairdon, and we're going to pick up again today, and I want to pick up with one that we haven't gotten to yet, William Branham.
Well, how much time do you have? William Branham was born not too far from Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, about 100 years apart. They were both born in a log cabin. Branham's parents were teenagers when he was born, and he was born in a single-room log cabin. After he was born, they cleaned him up and laid him in a crib. And a light came from the sky through the woods, the parents said, and came through the only window in the little cabin where the parents lived, and came over and sat down or lighted upon the little baby. And it was William Branham. And that's how God told his parents that he was a special child. So that's how Branham's life began. And that would give a tone to what it would be like throughout his life. He was probably the greatest prophetic gift in the last few hundred years in church history. His ability was given to him in 1947, 48, in that time period, by an angel that came from heaven.
And that's when he was out in the woods.
Out in the woods, yeah.
Yeah, in the trees.
The story is the angel appeared to him and said, "I've been sent from the throne of God," direct quote, "to tell you you've been given two gifts by which you will minister," and so forth. The first gift is to know the secrets of men's hearts. The second is to be able to do signs and wonders to confirm that which you've said is true. Da, 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 da. And so the prophetic gift of Branham, and the way maybe other prophetic people operate today, was Branham's gift was residential, where prophetic gifts usually flow more consistent with the gifts of the Spirit. So that's why I would separate or make a differentiation between his uniqueness and the normal prophetic operations of today. So when somebody says a person has a gift like Brother Branham, I don't quite swallow that, because his was unique, that it was residential. So to explain even this way, not Gordon, but Demas Shakarian was a friend of mine toward the end of his life, and him and Brother Branham were close. So I asked Demas Shakarian, what was Branham like, and what was your conversations? And one thing that Demas said was he asked Brother Branham one time, "How do you see all these things about people?" Because he could walk in this room, know everybody's name, what you had for lunch, what your wife was doing, where your kids were, and talk to you like they were part of your family, and it's all through that gift. And Brother Branham said, "It's like this." He goes, "There's a wall in front of me, and I just pull myself up above it, and as long as I'm above, I can see everything I need to see and talk about. When I get tired, I come down below, side the wall." And that's how he explained how his gift worked. And Gordon Lindsay wrote, they never knew Brother Branham to miss it in his experience with him, which is a pretty high regard.
Right.
And so Brother Branham had a lot of visitational things with angels. He had the glory cloud, or degrees of glory manifestations, the halo, the light around him, which are what I would call presence of God manifestations. There's a story about, and I've heard the cassette, of the power of God hit the stage one night in a Branham meeting, and the piano player fell off the piano bench, but the piano kept playing. And unique well, things like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Thousands saw, so it wasn't just a few that were making it up. Thousands saw this.
Right.
And so these are things that people, it's a legitimate recording of what happened. But he had a tragic end, a tragic death. He was hit by a drunk driver on his way home during Christmas, and he and his wife hit the windshield when the head-on collision and came back into the seats. And Brother Branham had many broken bones, but was still alive when his son got back to the car. His wife was dead, according to the son. There was no breath, no pulse. And Brother Branham said, "Put my hand on your mom." And he was whispering. And so as the son told me, he picked up his father's hand and placed it on his mom's leg or lap there. And then his dad closed his eyes, and his mother came back to life and began to breathe. So he raised his wife back from the dead and then would later die himself. The tragedy of that is, why did a man of that stature die tragically and prematurely? By this time, he'd begun to preach a lot of doctrinal error, and a lot of people at this time in church history did not understand to separate the gift or the manifestation of the gift from the word. So they thought if the gifts were still working, whatever they said had to be true.
Yes.
And so God had to move in a way to save Brother Branham's own soul and to stop the misconduct or the tragedy that was being sown in the full gospel churches. So there's a scripture that's very rarely performed or happened. The destruction of one's flesh for the saving of their soul is, I believe, described Brother Branham's death. There had to be the destruction of his flesh that he might save his soul and stop the error of Brother Branham's life. But that does not mean we do not receive who he is, what he did, and all the good years.
Right.
So we have to learn how to sort things. So when you mention people's names, I have to tell the good, and as a historian and as a minister, I have to also mention that, not because I'm mad at anybody or against anybody. I'd be on the front row going, amen, putting money in the bucket for everybody to talk about. But we have to be able to look at everybody honestly without being judgmental.
Yeah.
And so there's a way to look at everybody, to learn from the good and the bad, is what I hope that some of these comments I make that'll challenge the folks to think this way.
The interesting thing about Branham, and this goes into my next one, which is Gordon Lindsay, because I've let you talk so much, it's hard for me to not talk, was that he's the first one that I know of that actually introduced the fact that he recognized Gordon was his manager, for lack of a better word.
Worked for him from the beginning.
Worked for him from the beginning, and he was actually a better teacher than Branham ever was.
Branham was not a good Bible teacher. He was a Signs and Wonders man.
And obviously, in the end of his life, proved that to be true. But what stands out to me about that story is that he recognized it at that point. He recognized it and put him in the morning services.
He'd also put Bosworth, F.F. Bosworth, and some other folks to teach. In the beginning, he wouldn't even preach.
Right.
He would and he'd come up and do the prayer lines.
Yeah.
And pray for the people and do that kind of thing. But then the pressure, well, you have something to say, came.
Right.
And Branham made a mistake by changing offices at will. If you want to go deeper into the Branham story, it's a fascinating story. It's a wonderful story to study, but don't follow Branham so close you make the same mistakes. One thing I learned by doing all this, you have to be able to know when to stop following or when to stop drinking of that without a conscious of, I need to sort something here. So that's why I get a little nervous when people, oh, I love Brother Branham. I'm like, great, I love him too, but make sure you stop somewhere down this road. Gordon Lindsay was the man that kept a divine relationship that kept the ministry right. And what happened was, Brother Branham used to pray for people 2, 3 o'clock in the morning every night, and he got exhausted.
Right.
And so he walked in one day and said, I'm done. And Gordon Lindsay has got a briefcase full of auditoriums contracts signed, magazines for William Branham organization that people prayed for a magazine, and the main guy just walked out. And so he had to come up with something, and that's how the voice of healing was birthed out of Branham's premature departure. And then when Branham came back after a time of rest and wanted him to come back, he said, no, I can't do this. You might do this again. But as long as Gordon was close to Branham, things stayed right. Divine relationships are one of the hard things for people to keep. The devil works overtime.
Why do you think the devil works so hard on those divine relationships?
Well, they keep checks and balances. They're able to keep you on the straight and narrow, iron sharpening iron. Dowie and Eder was another one that failed, and Dowie went off. Same with Gordon and Branham. The devil fights those. He don't mind if it's just just some guy you're playing golf with.
Right.
The guy that can actually get your attention, make you think, or put you in check. That there's that revelation, that relationship. And those kind of things you got to work at. The two most important relationships besides your relationship with Jesus is marriage and the divine relationships like Branham and Lindsay. They work overtime to break them apart, because then you lose that bond, that strength, that accountability, and the devil can't quite penetrate easy when those things are in play.
So, Lindsay, obviously, we know his legacy is Christ for the Nations.
Great legacy. And all those books that everybody should read, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So huge.
One of the great charismatic writers that does not get enough respect for what he's written. So everybody watching, call Christ for the Nations and read Alda Gordon Lindsay's books.
Yeah.
They're great books. They're charismatic, great teaching books.
Yeah, it is.
And Brother Hagin actually learned how to write all of his books by watching Lindsay knock all those books out. You're part of that.
Really?
Part of that whole thing with the Hagin book library, Faith Library. Part was Buddy Harrison and Gordon Lindsay together that formed that, because what they learned back then is a power message in a cheap, inexpensive way, and they were able to change the world. I think Brother Hagin died with over 67 million books in print,
right, and
changed the whole course of theology through little bitty books instead of these monstrosities that I write. Yeah. He writes these little things that cost $1 or $3, and they're gold today.
Well, and I was in Africa, and some of the stuff that he'd written has transformed the nation.
Yeah.
And they're still circulating those little mini books and stuff. Okay, next one.
Okay.
Let's talk about Dowie.
One of the greatest men of all times. And the reason why many of the listeners do not know his name is because of how he ended. How you end is more important than how you started. Dowie was Scottish. He eventually made his way with his family to Australia, came back to Scotland for his university training, and went to the University of Edinburgh and took 2 courses, political science and theology, which shows an apostolic type of flavor in the choice of his studies. He was so good in theology, he was the student that would raise the hand and argue with the teacher because he was right, and the teacher would have to. So when he would do that, the students would go, oh my God, he's doing it again. That's the kind of, because he was so good in theology, they made him the head of the school's chaplain, infirmary, the chaplain for the infirmary, which gave him access to the medical lectures and the surgeries and stuff of the day. So he would sit in on the medical classes. In those days, you had the surgery and the patient, and all the doctors would sit in those round things, and he would just sit up there too. I got a picture of it. And he would hear what the doctors would say. And he concluded that it was an inexact science, which later in his healing ministry, he would preach against doctors, medicine, and demons, all the same thing. Because he was probably right, because he said, if you follow these doctors, they will kill you. They're butchers. Because medical science was not what it is today back then. So that whole philosophy of you believe God or die in the early Pentecost came from Dowie, because he had access to all the medical stuff. And he knew what was going on, because he sat there and said, these guys don't know what they're doing. So that's where that came from. He goes back to Australia because he didn't finish school, because there was a family crisis, and he takes a church. His first church in Australia, he leaves in less than a year because they were not worthy of his pastorate. They were a bunch of passive church members who did not deserve a pastor, and he wasn't going to waste their time with them. So this shows you his temperament. He goes to another church, and they like him. He's able to finish his school. During that time, the Great Plague hit Australia, and he began to bury people in his church and other churches. The plague was killing people. It was terrible. And so he was crying out to God, can't Jesus, who walked the seas of Galilee, that healed the sick then, can he do it today? Was the writing in his journal. And God illuminated one verse. You don't need a whole book or a chapter. Martin Luther changed the world on a half a verse.
It's true.
Dowie birthed the healing ministry that we know today on one verse, Acts 10:38. How God anointed Jesus with the Holy Ghost and power, went about doing good, and healing all that were pressed to the devil, for God was with him. That's the verse. When that went off inside of him, in the same moment of day, there was a knock on the door from a kid down the street. Mama had sent to get the pastor because the sibling was dying. He runs down the road without his hat or his coat. You didn't do that in those days. And he goes in, and the doctor is writing out the death certificate. All that was left was the time of death. And he says to Dowie, you're here, there's so many more sick, I gotta go. Just put in the time of death. And Dowie reacts and said, no, and he thinks that Dowie's kind of sick. And he goes into the room where the mother is frantically, crying because the daughter is dying, the little girl's dying. And Dowie, he's kind of like Wigglesworth or like Summerall in the way,
right.
Gruff and that kind of thing. He says, why did you call for me to come? And she goes, well, I thought maybe you could do something. And he prays his first healing prayer. I wish we knew what he said. We have no record of what he said. But they took a few steps back after they got done praying, however they prayed. And all of a sudden, like a little light, they said, began to come upon the child. And within an hour, the child was up, totally normal, playing with their other siblings, perfectly healed, and he buries nobody else in his church during that plague.
Wow.
That's the birth of the great Dowie healing ministry. He becomes famous for the healings, comes to America to take it around the world, ends up becoming a part of Chicago. Chicago at this time was a revival city. It was a capital where things were moving, but also God was. You got D.L. Moody and you got Dowie, the spiritual governor of the town, the world evangelist and the governor. Explodes into Chicago. The heavens are open, revival's taken on. Dowie's the great church of the thousands. The healing rooms begin to happen. And these are rooms where people would come from around the world seeking healing, and you'd come into and take a bedroom, and you had to get rid of your medicine and all the doctors, and you had a healing nurse, I'll call them, that would come and read the Bible to you and pray for you and minister until you got healed or you died, one or the other. That's how it worked. So we had I think up to 10 or 15 of those homes. They're like Victorian-style homes. And then he eventually makes a big mistake by going 40 miles north of Chicago to build a city called Zion that still exists today. And God never called us to build utopias. He called us to be in the world, salt and light. So anytime we pull out and try to build earthly utopias, it's a scriptural mistake. And so Dowie did that, built Zion, and it grew to over 20,000 people and citizens. Gordon Lindsay's parents were there, and Gordon Lindsay was born there and dedicated to the Lord by Dowie.
There in Zion.
And then F.F. Bosworth and his brothers were the trio, the trombone trio in Dowie's band. John G. Lake would come from Sault Ste. Marie over to Zion and become an elder in the church in Zion. So you have all of this happening because he trained 150 of the early Pentecostal pioneers that learned healing through Dowie. Now, Dowie didn't believe in tongues or the Holy Spirit, but he taught us healing. I interviewed the last living witness of Dowie's healing ministry in Zion that just died about 3 years ago here in Dallas.
Really?
And he was a little boy, and he said during the prayer time for the sick, the ushers would roll out some type of cloth. It wasn't plastic, but some type of cloth in the front of the church, because they knew when Dowie and the elders would pray, stuff would fall off or come out, and so they had to have a special cloth for all the stuff that would fall off of people's bodies, or they would throw that, cancers up or growths would come out. And it happened right there in the altar. And they'd throw down their crutches, and then they would sing a song, and the ushers had to roll this up and take it, and they would set it on fire in the afternoon and destroy it. And that happened in every service. That's how he says, I saw it. He goes, that was a part of
the service.
They had this special cloth they had already prepared, time for the sick. That's what happened, and they'd roll it up,
Isn't that amazing?
take it out. I want one of those meetings at least once in my life.
That's right.
Where we have to go roll it all up and burn it outside the church.
Roll it up.
Those are something that but he died thinking he was Elijah. He died trying to build more Zions. So that's why we don't hear a lot about him. I mean, people would come to him like Lillian Yeomans was a medical doctor that was addicted to morphine and got healed under Dowie. She would say, follow Dowie's faith, but not his doctrine, because he kind of began to get off thinking he was Elijah and these things. John G. Lake would be there and then actually leave before it got too bad and went back into business, where he made his $100,000 and did all that and started the Harvey newspaper in Harvey, Illinois. So you had these guys who loved him but knew there was mistakes. A funny little thing in history was in 1899, December 31st, D.L. Moody died. He was sick and he was an older man. Dowie sent a letter to Moody. If you'll repent from treating me so bad, I'll come and pray for you and God will heal you. Well, he wouldn't do it, so he died on the day before the 1900s. And then Dowie would die in 1907. And so that was a little interesting thing there. Now, a little thing that I would present to you and to the listeners, When Dowie Moody died and the early Pentecostals in Chicago faded in the 1920s, the great revival hub of Chicago turned into the great underworld of the gangsters.
Yeah.
We lost the great Chicago revival and have never gained it back because those that pioneered through prayer, work, and preaching had opened the heavens, had a great revival in that city.
Right.
And then by the next generation, Al Capone became the governor of that state or that city, and it has never changed since then. Now, we've got some good churches up there.
Sure we do.
But it's not an open heaven.
No.
So that's a little bit about Dowie. I mean, you could talk about Dowie for 8 hours and not exhausted. I mean, he had newspapers, he had the bank. I mean, he was going to build a Zion in Mexico and Jamaica. He was negotiating with the Turkish Ottoman Empire to buy the actual city of Jerusalem, to reestablish a new Jerusalem there, a Zion there for the Lord. So this guy was phenomenal.
He was.
I mean,
all right, well, let's get more current day.
Okay.
Let's talk about a friend of mine and yours. Let's talk about Benny Hinn.
Wow, that's a living person.
Yeah.
Benny, I saw him when I was a little boy, I should say a teenager. He came to my church in Tulsa when his first daughter had just been born. He is from Arab background, and so that's really nice. And he was the, I'm going to say this and hope that he don't get mad, was the runt of the children in his family. He was the little, small, frail, odd guy that they all made fun of.
Right.
As, you know, I know all the Hinn boys. They're great family. But you could see how they would pound on Benny a little bit. But he got enamored by a woman named Catherine Kuhlman. Never met her. Now, the way he talks about it, you think he'd actually met her. But I actually shook her hand and met her, so I got one up on him.
There you go.
So I got one up on him. But he would go to the meetings, sit in the crowd in the balcony, and so was enamored by how God used her, that it provoked his insides and his mantle and his calling to succeed. Actually, the mantle of Miss Kuhlman, whether we want it or admit it, it fell on Benny.
Yeah.
And he got it. And it's been on him since, I guess, the beginning of his ministry.
Right.
It takes time to fill in the mantle. It takes time to know how to work it within your particular grace and personality. In fact, that healing mantle was he was the first man to actually carry that particular one since its conception, since Mother Etter. It came from Mary Woodworth Etter to Sister McPherson to Catherine Kuhlman to Benny. That's a particular mantle of healing that you can trace in history. And he went and got the music. That's Catherine played. He did almost identical.
Right.
All he was the white dress. He had the white suit, everything. And that's the way he knew how to tap into that particular grace. We all find ways to unwrap or to tap into certain things, so that shouldn't be made fun of or it's obvious to me and maybe others too how that worked.
Right.
I've known Benny. The thing about Benny and Miss Kuhlman, they have the ability to recognize when the Holy Spirit shows up and know what the Holy Spirit wants to do and interpret it for the crowd and cooperate with it. One time I thought you could call Benny a great worship leader. Take 10,000 people into the worship of God, and when the presence comes, then he starts working. That's another way to explain Pastor Benny. He became successful through media. Media helped the crowds grow. Miss Kuhlman was a media personality too.
Right.
So we have not talked about the media's play in the success of some of these. But the media gives you the ability to amplify, to reach larger groups of people. So when you look at people like Dowie, who we were talking to a moment ago, or some of the others, Don G. Lake, who didn't have media and gained what they got, you have to give them a little bit more extra salutes, because they were able to accomplish it without the power of television or radio.
Right.
So,
so you brought some stuff of Catherine Kuhlman, and I want to see what you have.
Well, I've collected things, so I thought what I would do was, I brought Miss Kuhlman's passport. Ooh. This is Catherine Kuhlman's passport. I don't know if it's the camera, but that's, you can actually see her secret, her birth and death date. Even on her gravesite in California, it only has her death date, because she always wanted to keep her age a secret. So now we're telling the whole world. She was born, let's see here, May 9th, 1907. And so she died February 21st, 1976. So
69.
Yeah, so that's her passport. And then I have here her little credit card and business cards. And this is Catherine Kuhlman's credit card. And I know that's tacky, but at least I have it. And these are some of her business cards. Maybe we'll get different shots a little bit later. But these are, I got this stuff and her purse, her makeup kit, and all those things as it was the day she died. Tink Wilkerson called me years later because he was with her when she died. And he said, I know you like all this. Would you want to talk to me about this? I said, I want it all that I can get. So I got a lot of her personal effects, and that's where this comes from. So I have her white dress, and I have her TV gowns, some of her TV gowns. Her TV gowns I found at First Methodist Church in Tulsa. They were using them for Christmas cantata. The angels would wear Catherine's dresses and come floating across the stage because they're always flowy. They'd be yellow and green and different colors. And so those are some of the...
I wonder if there were any miracles that we don't know about.
We should ask that question, shouldn't we?
But,
so those are a few things that I brought of Catherine's.
And what's this Bible?
And this is Smith Wigglesworth, one of his Bibles. And this is November 1920. That's his handwriting, where he was giving this Bible to one of his converts, and he wrote out to them and signed his name. And here's Mark 11:23 and some scriptures here. So people say Wigglesworth could not write. Well, there's proof that he can write and sign his name.
Very nice writing as well.
He did not learn how to write until after he was married. His wife helped him learn. And so once he learned to read and to write, he never read any other book but the Bible in his life. And so that is...
I like the last of that. Only believe all things are possible. When I started this journey of learning about revivals, it took a lot of time. I had to look at books. I had to look at videos. I had to scour the internet. Listen, here the Revival Radio TV team has taken all of that effort out. All you've got to do is go to our website, revivalradiotv.com. Here you can contact us. You can watch episodes. You can sign up to be on our email list, and you'll get an email every week about what's happening and special videos. But I want to show you a special feature that's on the website, and that's the timeline. Now, on this timeline, you can see it in 3D, where it looks like that, or you can see it in 2D, and you can actually scroll through history of revival. Is that cool? You can go through here and you can see what God did. So let's go here, for instance, right here in, let me see a good one I want to stop. Okay, 1926, Veroniev's Pentecostal Christians of Evangelical Faith First Conference. I can find out more information about what happened in Russia. The Pentecostal leaders gathered in Odessa, Ukraine for an assembly. You know, it is amazing when you start into this. You see how God wove from one revival to the next, how He plucked people out from one part of the world and put them in somewhere else. This is a feature you want to take advantage of. So go to the website, would you? RevivalRadioTV.com. Look on that, sign up for all the updates that we get, and take advantage of this timeline. You won't regret it. Until next time, remember, be the one.